How many of you are familiar with the OECD's well-being framework? Stick up your hands. Okay, good. That's not too many. That's what I wanted to see. I want to ask you a personal question, and I want you not to stand on ceremony, but I would just like you to tell me the first thing that comes into your head. Philippe, what's the most important thing in your life? Don't think, tell me. Love of your wife. Okay. Etienne.
Happiness.
Ron? Okay. Laura? I'm picking on people I know or I've just met. Now I want people to throw something out to me. Most important thing in your life. Gentleman here looking at me. Health. Okay. Andre.
European social indicators, I'm just kidding.
Already mentioned. Okay, stuff that hasn't been mentioned already on that board. Knowledge. Okay? Keep it going. Don't wait for me. Safety. Anything else? Relations. Okay? Peace. Okay. There's a reason why I'm asking all of this. Independence. Okay. Okay, that's not bad going. Nobody has left something Freedom. Okay. It's a good point to end on, particularly now. Okay. It's in the interest of time. Andre was asking me how long this presentation was going to take, so it may already be taking a little bit longer than he was anticipating. Okay. Thank you very much for those contributions. Now I'm going to show you a little picture. You are all here at the European Parliament, and therefore you may recognize this picture. I was invited by the European University Institute in the summer of 2014, I think it was. The date is wrong there, apologies. It was 2014. And this is the famous, one of the famous Spitzenkandidat events. First time ever that the candidates for the political families come together. Okay. That is already being innovative. Never happened before. Televised debate, etc. So the European elections are moving. They are changing. Okay. You may not be able to see this because I don't know that I can zoom into this picture so easily, but I'm imagining a number of candidates in 2019. Above them is a visual of the, can I zoom? Do I just click once? Yes, I do. Thanks, Julian. Okay. You may be able to see it a little bit more clearly now. You have a candidate from the EPP. He or she, it's a she, sorry, her focus is on income and jobs, the offer that they're making politically to the EU. The candidate from the S&D, jobs and work-life balance. The candidate from ALDE, civic engagement. And the candidate from the Greens and the EFA, they're making a focus on civic engagement, work-life balance, community, and the environment. My word, what is Anthony talking about? Just keep it in your minds. I'm positing something, maybe not for 2019, but maybe for the future, and we'll come back to it. Okay, now why am I here? Why is the OECD working on this stuff? What's our legitimacy? And you're in an institution that cares a great deal about legitimacy. You consider yourself probably to be the most legitimate European institution because it is a body that is directly elected. I used to work for another body that wasn't directly elected and know all of the issues around its legitimacy. But it's very important to understand why it was that we were actually set up. Originally, OEEC came out of the Marshall Plan, NATO, etc. The OECD starts existing in 1960, and there's a convention that is developed. And that convention actually talks about improving the economic and social well-being of peoples. There's a link there. Think about the European Union's constitution and Article 3 and the importance of well-being for the institutions, but also for the construct that is the European Union as a whole. And the same mention, well-being of peoples. We don't just take that starting point, we move on and we actually start working on it. What does that mean when you actually translate it into practice? Now, many of you who followed the OECD down the years will know that we've done work on shipbuilding. We've done work on steel. This is back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s. Today, we do work on nanotechnology. But all of these are manifestations of something. They're manifestations of human activity. They're manifestations of things that we need, transport, it may be innovations, etc. But they're all actually connected to something, and that is the element where we're looking at actually improving life conditions. And those life conditions can be improved back in the 60s by shipping, organizing how you organize your transport at that time, to today's day and age where we have far more challenging environments that we have to deal with. The OECD, by the way, is the home of the agreement on aircraft subsidies. This is an important issue because the civil aircraft industry is a very important one globally, and there has been support to those different industries in different parts of the world. In a previous incarnation, I was very involved on trade disputes between Boeing and Airbus that some of you will remember. So we fast forward from the 70s, where we're producing a handbook on well-being, to an initiative taken by the former chief statistician of OECD, Enrico Giovannini, and he puts together the first World Forum on measuring the progress of societies. And I joined the OECD, I think it was in 2008, just before the crisis, and I'll come back to that point because that issue of timing is important. There's also, linked to this project that Enrico begins, a connection with a number of other international organizations who are dwelling on these questions and issues as well. And that includes the European institutions. Looking at these indicators to talk about health, education, the environment, and employment, productivity, purchasing power. As Andre said at the beginning, a great part of our focus, and unfairly so, and I like the description that Ron has in the paper produced by the EPRS, which is that GDP was never intended to be a measure of success in a holistic way. GDP gets converted into that. By whom? We are all co-responsible. The OECD needs to take a little bit of responsibility for that as well. So if we then push certain things like this, it's because we want to rebalance things. So we shouldn't beat up GDP, but GDP can only offer you certain things, and it is rather limited from a number of perspectives. This is 2007, pre-crisis. The crisis comes along, and since that time, we have also seen a lot of developments. Among those developments, here, among the EU institutions, we witnessed the first conference that was organized here in 2007, the roadmap produced in 2009, the EU's 2020 strategy that stressed the importance of well-being measurements, new forms of measurement, which are close clearly to Andre's heart, and the progress report produced in 2013. But it's not just the Commission. At national level, in the EU, and I've only included EU countries here, you have a lot of very important initiatives as far back as 2001 in the case of the Netherlands, for example, that have been taken forward. And by the way, a lot of legislators' initiatives. So this isn't just government taking an initiative, it's actually legislative bodies being at the forefront of this work, and I'll come back to that. So the OECD, on the back of the work that had been done by Enrico. Enrico actually leaves the OECD, I think it's in 2010 or 2009, I can't remember exactly. The crisis hits in 2008. We are then confronted with a very difficult and challenging situation. It's an existential crisis for the OECD itself, because some people could argue, well, hang on, doesn't the OECD exist in order to prevent these things happening? To warn against them, to say, hang on, we're going to go over the cliff. This was a moment of great soul-searching in the organization. That soul-searching is not exclusive to the OECD. The EU has been very involved in this, and many other organizations. But one of the things that we decided to do around this time was actually to take an initiative that was probably very much the purview of specialists. It was very elite. It was really not known outside a relatively narrow community. You have the biggest crisis since the organization is created. It begins as a financial crisis. It becomes an economic crisis, but it's really, and most importantly, a social and societal crisis that we live. And at that point, work around the concept of well-being and quality of life becomes a lot more relevant. Why? Because even if the GDP of your country does collapse, and we know that there are a number of cases within the OECD, those of you who thought the OECD was a club of rich countries, remember Iceland has been a member of the OECD from the beginning, and in 2008, the bottom fell out of Iceland's wealth. And Iceland remained a member of the OECD, and it is a member of the OECD today, and it's doing quite well since hitting the doldrums back in 2008. But this was a moment where we felt it was really important actually to be able to try and take some of these elements that we had been working on in some way, but actually make them relevant to the environment that people were living at a particular time. So we were looking to shift from theory to practice. The development of indicators for measuring well-being. The Measuring Societal Progress project gave us the basis for that. You will remember the Stiglitz, Fitoussi, and Sen initiative, which was very much based on the network that Enrico put together and the work of OECD, and President Sarkozy in Paris, who then blesses that and says, go forth and multiply, and tells the OECD to go forth and multiply. In doing that, our challenge is also to take this out of the realms of a narrow community and say, how is it that we can actually make this relevant to policy making? The better policies for the better lives. How do you incorporate these new concepts and notions that do go beyond GDP? And the third element, which I'm going to dwell on a little bit this afternoon as well, because it's going to be quite novel for many of you, is ask people what they actually think. Not assume, as we often do in elite policy-making circles, that we know. We may not know, we may know, but we may not know. And this all takes place in 2011. It so happens that it's the 50th anniversary of the OECD, and so it's quite an appropriate moment. Also, we need a little bit of time to turn things around between 2008, when the crisis hits, and actually be in a position to walk the walk. Not just talk the talk, but actually produce something. Andre mentioned 11 dimensions of well-being, and this is the moment where I turn around and I look at your list, and I see elements like love and happiness. This is the OECD. We can't put love in. Well, we can. There it is. But life satisfaction. Bear with us. We are an organization that also has its basis. And I see mentions of family. That's captured by a sense of community. Over there. You can see the icon tells a story as well. Health. It's there. Knowledge, often termed education, or the acquirement of that knowledge. Marcin mentioned safety. There it is. Environment. We don't have certain elements incorporated. We don't have elements around freedom, around peace and independence explicitly. But one very important element is this is not a happiness index. So that's the first thing to dispel from your mind. Imagine a Roman or a Greek temple, 11 pillars. One of those pillars, which is super interesting, is life satisfaction. I'm now going to give you the organizational framework that was developed prior to the index visualization that you saw. In those 11, how did we come up with those 11? There was a lot of work to come up with those 11. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, you can well imagine, because just in asking all of you, you've very quickly given me more than that, and there are things that you've put in there that aren't in here. There are things that I would put in there that aren't either there or there. For example, climate. I'm not talking about the environment now, I'm talking about whether you have that every day because you live here in Brussels, or where you have a very different climate because you live in southern Mexico. And how much impact does that have on people's well-being and beyond? The structure of our framework divides and combines two elements. On the one hand, what you would recognize from the GDP roots and origin, which is material living conditions such as income, wealth, jobs and earnings, and housing, with quality of life elements. Health, work-life balance, education and skills, social connections, so that's a sense of community, civic engagement and governance, environmental quality, personal security, and subjective well-being. In this concept, what you're seeing for the first time also is elements that are not objectively measurable. The focus that we have is on people rather than an economic system. GDP is designed to measure an economic system. This sort of stuff is designed to measure what people care about, human beings. It's also focusing on an outcome as opposed to an output. We all know how much money is spent on health in a country like the United States. We all know how much money is spent on education in a country like France. Unfortunately, when we look at the outcomes of that spending, they may be quite different in qualitative terms to what is achieved in countries that spend far less. And so this question of shifting from the output to the outcome is very important. Remember, what are the integrators of GDP? We're looking a lot more at input and output, things like productivity as well. Right, sorry, I'm just going to get myself back into this. All right. Okay. I mentioned objective, subjective. We've never mentioned people's sense of well-being at a global level before. In fact, the only way we can actually do this now is relatively rudimentary, but we're seeing a lot more initiatives at national level that are actually moving into this subjective space, and it's proving extremely interesting. We also are able, for the first time, to be able to analyze elements that are not just average, but also how are certain segments of the population or gender impacted in terms of well-being in countries. And this goes to the question around the focus on inequalities, the growth in inequalities that has emerged in recent years, and that is a very strong focus of the policy agenda now. But back in 2007, no one was really talking about inequalities in terms of elite policy making in the OECD environment, and in many countries that are actually doing pretty well, or thought that they were doing pretty well. Over here, this is one of my pet favorites because initially I didn't really understand what that meant. GDP regrettables. Regrettables is things that we would rather not have. We would rather not have prisons. We would rather not have armies. But these are things that are necessary in terms of our societal functioning. We know that certain things do not function well, and we have to cater for them. And these also are elements around our well-being. The other element, which is a very challenging one, and we would be the first to hold our hand up and say we're absolutely not there yet, is how easy is it to measure well-being, quality of life over time? Because the types of capital that you're looking at are capital that is over time. Depletion elements around that when you're looking at natural capital, human, social, and economic that we're a little bit more used to. So that is our systemic framework for the well-being initiative. Now, this is the OECD. There has to be a book. And there is. It's an extremely important element to the initiative. It's the How's Life is that was first published back in 2011. That's the 2013 version. But for the first time, we're actually providing a set of internationally comparable indicators. These are the indicators that underpin the index. The index is a different animal. We'll come to that specificity. But in order to be able to actually have the indicators themselves, these are contained and explained first off in 2011, and the methodological explanations, which were extremely important. Why? Because there were a lot of people who will question it and say, well, hang on, what is this? At the OECD, we do things relatively seriously. We took a while, but then we had to accelerate in order to meet certain deadlines. Now, in 2013, our focus shifts, and it's also mirroring how the crisis is evolving. So looking at the impact of the financial crisis on well-being, quality jobs, gender and sustainability. And soon to come out, we will be focusing on child well-being, volunteering, regional well-being, and the resources for future well-being. This will be coming out in a matter of weeks, and there will be a major conference building on the fora that were organized in the past in Mexico, in Guadalajara, in mid-October. So you'll be hearing a lot more about this. Now, let me dive into the index that actually is published, or it's shown for the first time. This is online and it's freely available to anybody who has access to a computer. This emerges in 2011, in the summer of 2011. You see our 11 indicators on the right-hand side in that so it looks a little bit like an iPhone setup, and actually if you do it on your iPhone, that's what you will get come up. Very important element for you to bear in mind. Over here, you have choices to make. You can give each one of those 11 dimensions a weighting and a level of importance. And it's very important that you do, by the way, because this equal weighting here and the results that that provides isn't really worth anything very much, in the sense that who decides to give equal measure to each one of these 11 dimensions, and for what reason. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do a live demo, because that would take a little bit too long. But I just want to show you what occurs when you actually make a choice. Here, you make a choice to give the sense of community. There was a lady who talked about family. I'm extending a poetic license. The most important thing in your life is a sense of community. Okay, who fares best along that axis? What country does best according to the OECD data that underpins it? And here you're seeing Switzerland, Denmark, and Norway performing extremely well. But now let's look at the picture changing when you incorporate the importance of jobs as opposed to sense of community. So this is a far more material element. At that point, Denmark drops down 3 places. It's still performing pretty well, but it's not performing as well. If I were to give you a measure, for example, that was focused on material living conditions, you would see countries like the United States and Luxembourg performing really well. On the other hand, if you were to look at a quality of life emphasis in your index, you'd suddenly see a country like Brazil, that is often at the bottom of the index, leaping into a mid-table position. And really interesting, by the way, that we have countries like Brazil and Russia, who are not OECD member countries. Their data is incorporated in this, and we will be growing this over time as much of what we do at the OECD. Now, I'm here with policymakers. So, important element when we're looking at the index is that this index is actually taking you into the analysis that the OECD has produced to explain why it is that countries are performing better or worse in policy terms in that index that you are then seeing. Why is it that their indicators are higher or lower in education, etc.? What are the reforms that they undertook? What are the changes that were made? This is part of the OECD's bread and butter, peer review, comparing and showing what is best practice. All of this, again, freely available. If you're interested in doing this by country, because you're, for example, Austrian and you want to know about Austria, or you want to invest in Austria, or you want to live in Austria, bingo, you go to the page on Austria. If you're really interested in a theme, an issue, for example, like jobs, you can search or you can engage by jobs. So this is a great pedagogical experiment that we're doing as well. But it's done in a way that's accessible to normal people. When I'm saying normal people, I'm talking about prime ministers and ministers. They're normal people. And they're people who have to then go out and convince people. We have MPs and MEPs represented here. They are abnormally intelligent in this case, but you have people who then have to go out and convince constituents. They have to convince people nationally and locally. And this is designed to actually make this stuff accessible to regular, normal people in an intelligible way. Okay. Great, so what's actually happened? We come up with this thing in 2011, fine, it could tank. In fact, a lot of people told me they thought it was going to tank, and it didn't tank. We've had almost 7 million visits to the Better Life Index since it was created in 2011. And interesting for me, I always find it interesting, theoretically the most materialistic country in the world, the United States, is the biggest visitor. Citizens from that country are the biggest visitors to the index. We have almost 1.5 million Americans who have visited the index. Now, before you say, I know there's access to broadband there and there's all sorts of other things, but still, it's a very interesting figure. Mexico being number 2 on the list, fascinating. I'll tell you there's a reason why Mexico's number 2, it's available in Spanish. And I'm here in a multilingual organization. Multilingualism is fundamental for an initiative like this. If you want to talk about personal stuff, like the stuff on that list, make sure you do it in somebody's language, their mother tongue. It's a lot more artificial when you're doing it in another one. And we're really proud of the fact that we now have the index available in 7 languages. And I think most of those languages are European languages. Official EU languages, all of them except for Russian. In terms of the visits, you can go really local with this stuff as well. This is Google Analytics for Belgium. Now, those of you who live in Brussels, most of you I think here probably do, will be surprised to see that Excel is not listed under Brussels, or that Schaerbeek is not listed under Brussels, or that Etterbeek is not listed under Brussels, because it's all part of the city, right? Well, we can tell here that our 26,500 people from Brussels, to which you have to add almost 3,000 from Excel, almost 1,700 from Schaerbeek, and almost 1,300 from Etterbeek. So you can go local with this stuff. It's interesting. If you're in a political environment as well, you care about what people think locally. And I showed you Belgium, I could show you that for every single country. Issue. We have a problem. Well, we have a problem. I think we do have a problem, because the ideal, I was very surprised from the beginning. Why is it that this initiative appeals more to men than to women? I thought it might be the other way around. Again, time. A lot of people have said, look, women have less time to spend on the internet playing around. They're busier, possibly. Maybe issues around access, etc. Anyway, the same call I always make, there are a lot of women in the audience. Can you help us redress those figures by spreading the word, engaging? And it's worked fantastically well in France, for example. In France, we have more women than men. We had the same figures until all of the women's networks of France gathered because they were interested in the initiative, and I gave them a presentation, and then they went out and multiplied, and we've seen a big difference in engagement. But fascinating to see that. Okay. Again, political body. You should be super interested in the generational impact of this thing, because the people, what I call the BLI generation, Better Life Index generation, people between 15 and 35 years old. This, for them, is something that grabs them. Now, here, again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go in, but there is another website inside the index. And this website actually shows you what you think, not what the OECD is telling you with the objective, or in some cases, subjective data. It's actually now being able to say, what is it that you have told us since we launched this initiative in 2011, since you completed your indexes, you had to make a choice. You had to decide how much importance you gave to education, how much you gave to health, how much you gave to civic engagement. Each one of those 11, you had to make a choice. This is asking people what they think. The way it's presented is very interesting. Here you have the example of Germany. So you can click on any one of the bubbles. You'll see age ranges, gender, and then you will see from top to bottom the rank in order of importance. In this case, in Germany, life satisfaction is number 1, health is number 2, sense of community, civic engagement are ranking lower down. Okay, interest of time again, I'm going to show you the results globally. We have had over 100,000 indexes that have been shared with us, and the overall results show life satisfaction and health, they are neck and neck, given the most proportionate importance. Now stable at 3rd, education. Stable at 4th, work-life balance. I found that personally surprising, work-life balance. It doesn't matter what country you're in. This isn't the preserve of somehow rich countries who can afford to worry about work-life balance. It's a real issue, it's a live issue. Safety, quite high. But look at civic engagement. Again, we're in a political body. We live off civic engagement. The OECD lives off civic engagement as well. If we don't have civic engagement, we're all in trouble. The European Parliament's in trouble, the OECD's in trouble, and good policy making, we would argue, and good politics is in trouble as well. Look at that, you can draw conclusions from that. I'm not going to necessarily. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro into what the Europeans are telling us, specifically, within that global picture. How are the collective preferences of Europeans manifesting themselves? You actually see an inversion at the top, slightly more importance to health rather than life satisfaction, in the case of Europeans sharing their indexes. Education along the global average, as is work-life balance. Environment is a little bit more important for Europeans than sense of safety globally. And you again see civic engagement is coming in at the bottom. Okay. Now, I think this is fascinating as well. When you look at how those preferences have evolved over time. So the first indexes received, and I would tell you right now there were relatively few in 2011. You can see for each year how the trends evolve. And I don't have a clicker, so that's the reason why I keep stepping over. I've lost something in here. What you're seeing, for example, is a decline in civic engagement, which is quite marked. You're seeing an increase, proportionate increase in health. These ones are relatively important. And each one, you can see starting positions and ending positions. For example, life satisfaction has been consistently quite high. Health, in the case of Europeans, has proportionately grown, as has the sense of safety. So it's very interesting to be able to map across time in a way that we can't really do with the official data that underpins the index, because that tends to be very static, and we're going to have to wait a longer period of time for it. What about men and women? Are we from Venus and from Mars? We are from Venus and from Mars, but pretty much only in two areas. Income and importance of community. So it's a lot more important. Sense of community is more important for women than for men, and income is given greater importance by men than by women. But actually, when you look at it overall, we're pretty much the same. This is what the 100,000 index is, the European segment of the 100,000 index. By the way, European indexes account for about 40%. EU indexes, 40% of the total. EU visits account for about 35%. So Europeans are more engaged when they come. They don't just come and visit, they come and participate as well, and they're interested in this. You see how health is performing for those who are over 35. This is now a breakdown by age range. What are those who are older giving most importance to? Okay, we say there's no surprise there. Work-life balance seems to be given less importance over time. I don't know what that means, if people don't have to worry about it, because actually they have a lot more life and they have less work. Something to mull over time. Okay, now, this is serious, because part of what could have happened with this is that it might not have been taken particularly seriously. Entities for whom GDP is really important. The Financial Times, you know, most of its stories, in many respects, they relate to hardcore stuff, right? Well, the Financial Times puts the index on its front page of all its media for 48 hours. And it's done by the economics editor. The gentleman some of you will remember, he was the predecessor of Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke. The OECD, as part of its Better Life initiative, has created an index that allows a side-by-side comparison of countries according to various quality of life indicators. These could be useful in measuring economic progress or setbacks, as well as in explaining economic decision-making or projecting future economic outcomes. That's the chairman of the Federal Reserve talking in 2012. The Enquête Commission by the Bundestag, again, kicking off in 2013. They're looking at this as a model for future society in Germany. And now, I hope you'll be able to listen to the Irish Deputy Prime Minister at the OECD.
This is a very tricky exercise for the leaders of two parties in a coalition government, particularly when the television cameras are on us. And the interesting thing is that we did actually give different scores to the different indicators, but we ended up with the same result. And that, I think, has to be the secret of a good coalition government. We want Ireland to be at the very top of your better life indices. And that means, in the first instance, planning a route to full employment. We are, of course, also conscious that we are doing all of this not just to meet economic objectives, that ultimately achieving these economic objectives is about building a better quality of life, ensuring that we have better living standards, and that our population enjoys better health, a better environment, and safer communities.
Okay, that's the Deputy Taoiseach in Ireland. And the Irish Business Federation, IBEC, produced this out of the blue. We had no contact with them at all. They want to double EU average growth. top 20 prosperity in the EU's regions, and he wants to be top 5 of the OECD better life countries. The business community. I can say more, but I don't have the time right now, because in terms of the interest of business. I want to close with this point, which is, at the OECD, and in most cases, I think people are in what they're in order to try and actually get these two things to go together. Perhaps part of what led us to what happened in 2008 was that these two things started separating a great deal. I'm positing this. This is a personal view. It's not an OECD view. But in 2007, maybe our good politics were over here and our good policy was over here. You want to get elected? Do this. Is that good policy? So our job is to actually get politics and policy to come together. And if the index is some contribution to that, then I think we'll all be very happy. And thanks again for the opportunity to present this to you here today.